You know, as photographers, we should be a little bit more flexible. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm becoming a pool man, but talking about flexibility, trying out different things, be it in Photoshop, be it in our photo shoots. Right now, I'm not even sure if this camera is focusing on me or somewhere else. I just set it to auto and let it do its thing. And I'm also not sure if you can hear me properly, if this little wireless microphone actually works or not. But hey, let's be flexible. So today, we're not retouching a photo as such, but we'll create a template. Hey everyone, Stephan here. I hope you're doing well. As I said, I believe we photographers should be flexible and should be able to create different things. And sometimes we take so many photos, we retouch those photos, and we sort of neglect a little bit the creativity. So why not do something else for once? As I clean this pool, which really needs cleaning, I think we do something different today in Photoshop. We're creating a template that looks like an open magazine. That's a great way to present your photos or your ideas or your designs. But more importantly, it includes a lot of small little techniques, be it how you organize your layers in groups, or how you warp something, or how you work with smart objects, and how you nestle different smart objects together. So all of this will be in this short little tutorial. So let's jump into the editing suite and into Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, we start from absolute scratch. Now, the first thing we need to know is the document size. I personally go by the Australian standard paper size, which is A4, and I want double that to have the left and the right pages of our magazine, which means my document should be A3. You, of course, adjust that depending on where you live and what your standard paper sizes are. So I hit Command N, create a new document. I go into Print. I find my preset for A3 and I want that landscape, and I say Create. Now we have our A3. I want to halve this so that we have the left and the right pages. Easiest way is to go into View and say New Guide Layout. I want 2 columns and 1 row, and there we go. So now to create our left and our right pages, I take the Marquee tool, I select the right side, I create a new layer, either by clicking on this little plus or keyboard shortcuts. I call this right, and I just fill it with any kind of color. Now I inverse the selection by either going into Select, Inverse, or I use the keyboard shortcuts, which I tend to do. I create yet again a new layer, and I call this left, and I'll change the color a little bit, make it a little bit brighter gray, and I fill this as well, and then hit Command D for deselect. So now we have our left and our right side. I don't need those guides anymore, so I'll go into View, Clear Guides, so nothing gets in our way. Now, before I do anything else, I want to convert these into smart objects. To do so, I hold the Control key, I click just behind the name and say Convert to Smart Objects, and I do that, of course, for the left and the right side. Now that we have smart objects, we can select both and transform them or make them a little bit smaller so that we can create our 3-dimensional look. Now, the beauty about smart objects is that they will always retain the original quality. That means I can scale them up and down as many times as I want, and it will always re-render based on the original size, and unless you go larger than what you originally created. But anything smaller will re-render, so you can change that shape as many times as you want. Now, the other thing important to mention is that if you create copies of smart objects, they will always render the same. Hit Command J as a normal duplicate, as we would do. I'll just move this over here for a second. Let's say I go into my left page and I'll do something stupid like create some weird thing here. I close this document, say save. You can see that both of them have been changed, the copy as well as this one. If we want to avoid this, we should not just copy it as we usually do, but instead hold the Control key, click on it, new smart object via copy. So now in this case, it still looks the same. Let's move this one out of the way. However, if I now change the left, and let's take a black brush, do something else, close this, save, you can see that the original simple copy has applied this. The new one that we did via copy, new smart object via copy, has not taken on those changes. This is important to remember when it comes to creating page 2 of our document. So let's throw these away. All right, so I don't like those squiggles. So let's go in here, pick some kind of gray and just fill this again. Close it, save. There you go, we have a clean document again. So I'll select both of them by holding Shift, hit Command T for transform. Now I can, of course, scale them up or down as I want, but I want to create that 3-dimensional shape. And to do so, I have to adjust these individual handles. And to do so, I hold the Command key. As you can see, as soon as I hold the Command key, the cursor will change. So now that I hold the Command key, I can adjust individual handles. So I'll try to move those individual handles in a way that I create a believable and still proportional A4 double page. Something like that. Could be a little bit more 3-dimensional. Maybe something like that. Now that I have this, I can, of course, still scale it up a little bit. I might move this over even more, maybe take this down a little bit. You can play with this until you feel like, yep, that's a good shape. And once you're happy, you hit OK. So now we have the left and the right. So let's create a more paper-like shape. I select the left page here, again, hold Command T. And now instead of working with those handles, I'll go into the warp tool. Now I will leave these corners alone where they touch each other because I want them to be perfectly aligned. However, I go in the bottom here into the middle and just push this up a little bit. And I'll do the same on the top. Wonderful. Now we get that beautiful curve as a paper would do. Now I don't like the top corner here, so I move this down a little bit, something like that. And that looks pretty good. And I hit OK, or you just click on that little tick box here and I'll go to the right. I'll do the same, Command T, go into my warp tool, move this up a little bit, move this one up a little bit, and I'm pretty all right with this. I move that corner over a little bit. And now I would like to have a steeper curve, as if the paper curls up a little bit earlier and then goes over. To do so, I grab the handle here and move it closer. And as you can see, you can create all kinds of really cool shapes, but I want to be subtle about this. So I'll just do this a little bit. And of course, that would then also happen at the top. Something like that. And I'm pretty happy with this. Now, as you can see, because I moved this top corner before, we now get a curve in here as well. It's not a straight line anymore. If you want to have a straight line, again, you have to grab those handles and align them properly. So this is sometimes a little bit of a play, but anyway, I'm pretty happy with this and I confirm. So now that we have our shape, before I do anything else, I want to create a second or a third page. And to do so, rather than duplicating, as we talked about it, I will hold the Control key, click on here and say New Smart Object via Copy. So this will be our page 2. So I move it behind in our layer stack and I call this page 2. And I do the same thing with the left, New Smart Object via Copy, move it behind and again call this page 2. So now that I have this, I'll go into my page 2, give it some crazy color so I know what I'm doing. And I'll just hit save. We can't see it because it's still hidden behind the left page. Control T for transform, go into the warp tool. Now just move that corner down a little bit and this side a little bit. And now we have our page 2 behind. I'll do the same for the right page. I open it, pick some color, doesn't matter what it is, just so that I see what I'm doing. Hold Command T, go into the warp tool. Again, I move that corner down, move the center down a little bit, something like that, and I hit OK. So now we have the top pages and we have left 2 and right 2. Wonderful. So now we're nearly there. Just for the sake of it, I'll create a new layer just above the background layer. I'll call this Shadows. Now I hold the Command key, click on the left page, which makes a selection of this. Now I hold the Command key and the Shift key and click on the left page 2, which adds the left page to our selection. Again, I hold the Command key and the Shift key. I click on the right page, which adds this to our selection as well. And lastly, I hold the Command and the Shift key and click on our right page 2. And so we have added all of those as a selection. And I can now just select background color of black and fill this. Now we won't see this. I deselect because again it is hidden, but as you can see in the layer stack, there it is, my shadow. So again, I'll go into transform, hit the warp tool and move this out a little bit just where I think that the shadow could be. And now because this is on one layer, I can also select only a part of it. So in this case, I just select the bottom part of it. I'll hit again, Command T for transform, go into the warp tool and just push the middle up so that we get that more accurate kind of shape. So I'll do this again just to show you how many times you can fiddle around with this. I'll go into the warp tool, move this down a little bit, and I'll do this for the right side as well. Just like that, Command T, warp it. You can play around as much as you want. So now that I have the shadow sort of in place, I have to blur it. So I go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. That looks pretty good. Now I move the whole shadow down a little bit like that. Of course, now it's way too strong, so it might be 20% or something like that, just to give that little bit of realism to it. Now that we have this, we could populate our pages. However, when I create a template that I also want to use in the future, I change this slightly. So what I'll do is I select all of these from shadow all the way up to the left page, hold the Shift key and click on the folder icon, which puts them all into a folder. So I call this composite. I'll open this up. I select left all the way to right, and now I create duplicates of those and move them out. Here we go. So I'll take the opacity of all of those down and switch them all off. So what's happening is that these ones up here are of course affecting these ones because we did a normal duplicate. However, these ones are the ones that are visible and these ones are not. And that allows us to name this so that in the future when we open this document, we know exactly what to do. So let's leave our composite for a moment and rename this and say replace with left page. Let's call this replace with left page 2, replace with right page, and replace with right page 2. So if I ever open this document again, I'll see exactly what I need to do. I need to double click this, replace it with the left page, same for page 2, right page, page 2. So now we can forget about those and go back into our composite. So let's assume there are white pages. Let's change them all to white. The reason why I do this is so that I can create the shadows. So I'll go in front of the left page. I switch all others off so I see what I'm doing. I create a new layer on top. I call this middle shadow left. I'll take my gradient tool from black to transparent. And I just create a gradient slightly on an angle, something like that. And I'll clip it with the left page. So I hold the Option key, and as you can see, the cursor changes between the layers. I click, and now it's locked in. If you didn't get the angle right straight away, you can always go into Transform and just turn this a little bit until it is perfect. So now that we have that, I'll change this to Multiply and take the opacity down a little bit. I'll do this again, just to have a very strong middle line. Again, I create a new layer. I'll call this middle shadow left 2. Again, I'll take my gradient tool. I do a small gradient like this. I clip it, go into Transform and turn this until I have the right angle. Move this over a little bit. There you go. Again, I'll change to blending mode to Multiply and fade it in just so that I have a little bit of a stronger edge here. And you guessed it right, I'll do the same thing on the left side, just a little bit. So again, I create a new layer, gradient tool, black, something like that. I'll clip it, I'll transform it, I'll turn it slightly, and I probably only need a few percent in terms of opacity, something like that. It already starts to look pretty three-dimensional. Now, the beautiful thing is this starts to look very complicated. At the end of our whole composite or our template, we just close this and we just have those 4 pages which we can change. Beautiful. So let's go in here again. Now we go to the underlying page, page 2. I create a new layer. I'll call this left page 2 shadow. I'll clip this with the layer below. I just fill it completely with black, change again the blending mode to Multiply and take the opacity down to something like 40% or something like that. And now I'll create another one just to be fancy. Clip it again with that layer, take my gradient tool, pull out the gradient just so that we get this darker area here. Yet again, I switch this to Multiply and maybe to 70 or 80%, so it's quite strong. Now I'll go through the right pages much quicker without explaining too much. What we don't see right now, because they're white pages, is that we don't have any highlights. If this would be a dark page, we needed some highlight to make it really realistic. Let's try out what we talked about in the first place. So I close my composite layer here. I double click on the left page and let's make that black. Close, save, there you go. As you can tell, we need something that makes even a dark page look more three-dimensional. Let's do the same thing for the right page. Double click it, make it black. Maybe not completely black, maybe a very dark gray so that we see what we're doing. So close this, save. So it would be nice to have some kind of a highlight on here. So I'm going back into my composite stack. I go in front of my layers here for the right side. Again, I create a new layer. In this case, I take a brush, very soft brush, something like that, about this size. And I'll just create a line from here to here to make sure that it's not all over the show. I'll click, hold the Shift key and click again, and that will create that line. Again, like before, we can, of course, if we didn't get the angle right, move this slightly, but I like it just like that. It's a little bit too harsh for me, so I actually blur this. I'll go into Gaussian blur and blur this a little bit. Wonderful. And so it doesn't spill anywhere else. Again, we have to clip it with that layer. I'll set the blending mode for this one to screen and take it down to 20-30%, something like that. And I might do the same for the left side. So I'll go into our stack for the left side. Oh, the left shadow, I didn't name that properly. Bad, Stephan. So a new layer. Again, I'll take a brush, but in this case, I'll take a much bigger brush. create sort of a corner here, something like that. Again, I'll set this to screen. I'll clip it underneath and give that like a 20% or so. So now even with a black page or a dark gray page, we get this three-dimensional look. And of course, we can adjust this however we like down the track. Now, to keep the overview of what we're actually doing in our composite stack here, I would suggest to go and select each page and create subgroups. So I select the left highlight, hold the Shift key and click on my left, which means they're all selected. And I hold the Shift key and click on the group icon, which puts them all into a group. And I call this left. I'll do the same thing for page 2. Hold the Shift key, click on the group, and let's say that's left P2. And I'll do that for the right side. Again, I call this right. And I'll do this for the right page as well. Hold the Shift key, group, and call this right P2. So now that already looks better. Here comes the fun. We can close this. We can even lock this, so nobody's going to change anything to it. And maybe we even give this a little bit of a color. You can hold the Control key, click on the eye, and pick a color. We make the background red. And then we select these ones here and make them green. So we know, yay, that's what we should be working with. Wonderful. So here comes the fun. Now we just have to put some pages in here. Here we have a nice photo of Sydney. Let's turn this into an article or something like that. I just copy this. I go in here, and where do I want this? I want this on the left side. So I just double click here where it says replace with left page. Paste this in, close the document. Looks pretty good. Let's do this again. Let's take this, I don't know, editorial or whatever. Double click on the right page, paste this in, close the document, save. Voila, our magazine is done. If we now want something on the second page, we can do that, of course. What I sometimes do is I use the right side as the second page for the left side, so I don't have to create something else. So let's double click the left page and paste in what we had here so that it's not that obvious. We might even go one step further and transform this and just flip it vertical. And we close this. And voila, we have a second page, and we have no idea that this is actually coming from here. Now, I want this second page to be a little bit darker on both sides. So instead of going back into my composite stack, I will just do this on the page itself. I create a curve, take the highlights down, and just push the midtones down a little bit as well. Close this, and now that looks pretty good. Now, as you can see, having created those highlights and everything, it just gives it that little bit of three-dimensional feel. If I would go into our stack here, let's move this down again, and I go to our right page here, once I switch that highlight off, it really becomes more realistic. Now, there's one thing that you might see that has happened. We have this bowing, so it's not straight. That comes from the fact that I changed this curve differently than the top one and didn't adjust it accordingly. So it's very helpful to use something like these pages here, which have straight lines, to make sure that your template warps correctly, because the left page works perfectly fine. However, the right page does not. So we have to fix that. We have to go into our right page here, hit Command T, go into the warp tool. And as you can see, if we can adjust this or adjust this angle, we get that page straight. And this is something that you have to be careful of. So it's very helpful to have, at least for your first template, some page in here which has those straight lines. So I believe that is okay. And now we have a template that works just fine no matter what we throw at it. That's really it. You can go stronger with those shadows, with those highlights, however you want. And even though you don't really realize them much. Let's take them away from the right side as example. And you see how flat that looks. We want that shadow here in the middle. We want that shadow on the right. We might want that highlight. You can even make that stronger depending on what you put on it or how much light you want on top of the whole thing. And the same thing, of course, applies to the shadow if you want that to be much more side lit. And if you want to go further than this, well, you can always then on top of it create some lighting effects or change the background color. And that's as easy as going onto the background here and we select solid color. You pick any kind of color. Let's pick a gray. If you want to make it even more fancy, create one more layer. We take a gradient tool with white and grade it in just something like this. And there you go. You have something nice and you got your perfect template. So I had enough. I hope this was a little bit helpful and I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, try out a few things, try out a few new things and find what makes you happy and keep those pools clean.